Hey, what's happening, everybody? Mike Weber here. Just wanted to chat a little bit today with you guys about some of this insanity that we're seeing in the stock market. It is currently being pumped in every direction from the Federal Reserve, from the federal government, from Trump's press conferences, from Larry Kudlow. Everybody just trying to assuage the public and make them believe that somehow we're going to have this remarkable economic recovery all of a sudden, when in reality all that is happening is the Federal Reserve is printing unimaginable amounts of money to prop up all markets, to take away all risk from risky operators throughout the economy. And this is really just some of the most ridiculous and ultimately sickening things you can possibly watch, as 17 million Americans in just the last 3 weeks have already filed for unemployment, while at the same time we've been seeing a stock market rally that is just unimaginable over the last week to 10 days. Take a look here at the initial jobless claims over the last couple of weeks. And I mean, this is just unimaginable. I mean, you're going back to 1967, and this really goes back, all the way probably as far as we even have records for this information. And this is the new unemployment claims. I mean, look at the previous recession that we had. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the number of people that are currently filing for unemployment. And somehow this means that we should have a good stock market, rising stock prices. I mean, this doesn't make any sense at all in any version of twisted reality that you can come up with. Now, you look what's happening. I mean, the Federal Reserve almost, every day is coming out with some new, completely unprecedented and ridiculous program to ultimately make bad operators, large corporations, people in the financial world whole, corporate America, while Main Street, sits back and waits for news on their $1,200 stimulus check. And while we find out that a lot of these programs like the EIDL loans, the PPP loans that were supposed to help lots of sole proprietors, truly small businesses, independent contractors, and so forth, are actually not even getting access to any of this cash. Banks have already played all kinds of tricks and mandated that you have a previous business relationship and or business loan relationship in order to qualify for these PPP loans. I mean, by the time they allow true, small businesses or independent contractors, gig economy workers, access to any of this money, if that even happens, clearly there will be no money left, which of course will be another excellent excuse for them to go even bigger on the next package. So a few billion falls into the hands of the average person, while trillions of dollars goes into corporate America and big business, and everybody gets their slush funds and gets bailed out. Now, here's another article just saying that free markets are dead. This was announced today. The Federal Reserve is now going to start buying junk bonds and high-yield ETFs. I mean, think about the insanity here. You have corporations, you have, individuals, whoever they were, that loaded up on these junk bonds, that bought junk bonds, knowing full well the risk that they were taking, and of course getting a return that they felt was reasonable given the circumstances. And now the Federal Reserve is just going to come in, buy up all of this junk from everybody and anybody, and make everybody holding this junk completely whole, as if they took no risk whatsoever by buying these sorts of bonds or buying into these bond ETFs, where the average person out there who has to pay their rent, who has to take care of their expenses, who has to buy food, they're not getting any bailout. They're not getting any free money. They're not getting made whole, for anything that they did or didn't do in the past. This is literally just complete theft, and all of this is getting lumped onto the backs of the taxpayer and being guaranteed by the federal government. I mean, this is insane. All of this stuff has a true cost to every individual in society who's working, who's trying to be productive, who's struggling to take care of their family. All of this debt falls onto each individual's back. So if you're acting prudently and you have no debt, the reality is that the federal government has been accumulating debt at such a massive pace that likely we or our children or even the future generation beyond them will never have a chance to know what it's like to actually live a debt-free life. So eventually something has to give. Either we have massive inflation, we have, dramatically increased taxes, or we suffer a terrible, terrible long-term depression in this country until we get back to some sort of financial reality. So in this next article, here you have Powell again trying to pump the markets along with everybody else, there's really no reality on what the Fed can do. And we've already seen that there is no limit to what the Fed will do. I mean, they've essentially come out and bought almost anything up until this point. And I've already been talking about the whispers from Yellen and Kudlow and other people that are talking about them coming into the market and buying stocks outright. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. The value of a company is determined by their earning power, their current earnings, their future growth potential. All of those factors are what determines a company's value in the marketplace. Now, if we have a government that literally prints money out of thin air, which of course will lead to inflation in the future, simply buying up the stock market, creating winners and losers, how is that fair to the average man, to the common man who doesn't own a lot of assets, who doesn't own a lot of stocks, who really needs an opportunity to start building their retirement and planning for what their retirement's going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years? I mean, they're being forced into a vortex to have to buy stocks, to buy assets at such ridiculous prices, taking into account zero risk essentially, in the hopes that somehow they're going to be able to ride this wave being created by the Fed. What if that fails? What if something happens? What if massive inflation takes over? What if the Fed has to reverse course at some point in the future and raise interest rates to rein in hyperinflation, and everybody is completely economically devastated for 10, 20, 30, 40 years? I mean, look at the stock market in Japan. It peaked in 1989 and it has never come close to those highs again, right? So anything can happen. We need to let markets function as they were intended. Investors who made bad decisions to lose their money, and allow new investors that make good decisions to invest their money for the future safely and without the risk that's being created by the moral hazards and the ridiculous things that are happening at the Federal Reserve Bank. Here's another one. Federal Reserve seizing control of the entire U.S. bond market. Now, this might be a little bit excessive, but more or less, they're going in and they're going to buy as much bonds as are necessary to create liquidity, meaning they want to encourage all of these companies, these zombie companies that don't earn anything, that haven't even been able to earn enough to cover their interest payments over the last several years, that are ultimately out there competing against hardworking, honest business people that want to actually earn a return so they can pay their payrolls, pay their people, pay their own salaries, and earn a profit, that are ultimately losing out and going out of business because they're competing against companies that don't even have to earn a penny to stay in business. I mean, think about that. These companies will lose money year after year after year because they start out on venture capital, then they do an IPO and they sell the, bogus stock to the public at a ridiculous price, and then they turn around and take on a bunch of debt on top of that and never earn a penny, but go out there and lose money month after month, year after year, and ultimately put everybody out of business. Some of them make it, a small percentage do, but the majority of them fail. So do we really want this happening? Do we want the Federal Reserve to print money out of thin air to nationalize the entire U.S. economy? I mean, I certainly hope not. That's not what I want to see, and I hope you don't either. Look at this. New York apartment leases plunge as real estate industry is paralyzed. So this is not just leases that we're seeing. I mean, we are going to see catastrophic defaults across the board in all kinds of different areas related to the real estate industry. And why is this happening? Well, this is happening because everybody is leveraged so far to the hilt that they literally cannot survive a couple week downturn. I mean, think about how insane that is when we know that economically we always have recessions. We have recessions on average every 10 or so years, going back 100 years or whatever the case may be. And yet companies do not have a couple months reserved to weather the storm. Well, of course they don't. They've been encouraged by the Federal Reserve to take on unimaginable amounts of debt, to do exceedingly risky behaviors, leverage themselves up beyond any sort of measure of reason, getting into all kind of derivative contracts and crazy stuff that doesn't make any sense at all. And this is where we end up a couple weeks into a lockdown where companies should have been prepared. And honestly, companies that aren't prepared, companies that aren't viable, that should have never been in business in the first place because they kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing in order to continue to pay dividends and look like they were actually doing something valuable to the economy, those businesses need to go under. They need to go bankrupt. They need to get rid of their debt, or they need to go out of business and allow other businesses that are viable, that are going to create long-lasting jobs and actual efficiency in the economy in terms of producing something of value and not simply using debt to actually create no value in the economy. So if we take a look at what's happened over the last week in markets, I mean, look at this. As we've seen the greatest number of jobless claims in the history of the United States of America, as we know that there's no way possible that we're going to have a rebound, recovery, and all of a sudden have a V-shaped recovery and everything's going to go back to normal. We've literally been ramping up every single day up into, a territory that's really just below the recent highs of a month and a half, 2 months ago. So, I mean, at the rate we're going in another week or two, we're probably going to take out the previous highs. Now, even if you guys have some stocks, like I do myself, of course, one part of you always wants the stock market to go up. But the more important thing here is to keep in mind that we have to have markets that actually operate on sound fundamentals and reason. Otherwise, we all just get caught up in a fake and phony vortex, and eventually it's all going to end, and it's going to end very badly for everybody. And that's not fair to anybody. So even though I might stand to benefit by having stock prices go up to some extent, I want stock prices to be a reflection of the risk that I'm taking and the companies that I'm purchasing into, not me simply trying to ride a wave created by the Federal Reserve and figure out what their next move is going to be so somehow I can get richer than the next man who's trying to play the game fairly. I can't believe what's happening. I mean, I can see the president trying to pump the stock market up to, way, way, way above the recent highs. I mean, can you guys imagine a world where the stock market, the Dow's at 40,000 when we have literally people in the streets? I mean, the bread lines are already growing right now across the country. Thousands of cars are waiting in line. People can't pay their bills. They can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay their rent. They can't even buy food, and they don't have a job. While we have a stock market in America that's soaring to the stars. I mean, does that make any sense? Is that fair for anybody? Is that the country that we want? Do we want the Federal Reserve printing endless trillions of dollars and doling them out to the winners and choosers that they pick, the people that they want to help continue to get rich and bail out of this situation, that are ultimately going to have all of the capital they need to take advantage of any opportunities that exist in the market, such as depressed real estate values in the future, other assets that they can buy cheap, or the same people that are really going to be able to benefit greatly from knowing what the Fed's next move is, where the average person like you and I, we're going to have no idea what that's going to look like. So guys, it's time. We cannot allow the Federal Reserve to keep doing this. We need to share our voice. We need to say no more debt. We don't want to have more debt lumped onto our backs while we wait for our $1,200 check in the mail. I hope you guys are with me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, do so. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.